The courthouse smelled like old paper, cold marble, and decisions that could never be undone. I remember that first, not his face, not the judge's words, not even the echo of the gavel, but the smell. Sharp, sterile, final, as if the building itself existed only to erase lives and rewrite them in ink. I sat on the wooden bench, my hands folded in my lap, nails pressed gently into my palm. Not enough to bleed, just enough to remind myself I was still here, still breathing, still real. Across the room, my husband sat straight-backed and confident, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He looked good, better than he had in months.
Calm.
Collected. Victorious. He didn't look at me once. Not when the judge called our names. Not when the papers were passed forward. Not when years of marriage were reduced to numbered clauses and signatures. He already knew the outcome. Everyone did. The penthouse, his. The joint accounts, his. The investments, his. The art, the jewelry, the antiques passed down through my family, his. It was clean, efficient, brutal, and I didn't fight it. I could feel the confusion in the room like static electricity. My lawyer kept shifting in his seat, glancing at me every few seconds as if waiting for me to finally snap, to interrupt, to object,
To say, this isn't right.
But I stayed silent. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, do you agree to the terms as stated? For the first time that morning, my husband turned his head. His eyes met mine, cool, sharp, measuring. There it was. That look. The one he wore in business meetings right before someone lost everything. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not enough for anyone else to notice.
Just enough for me.
A private victory. I inhaled slowly. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. I agree. The pen felt heavier than it should have when I signed my name. Each letter curved neatly, deliberately. No hesitation. No cracks. When I finished, I slid the paper forward. That was it. 10 years of marriage ended with a stroke of ink. The gavel came down. Case closed. My husband stood first. He buttoned his jacket, nodded politely to the judge, and finally, looked at me fully. "Take care," he said softly, like a courtesy offered to a stranger. "I hope you'll be okay." I almost laughed. Almost. He walked past me without another word, his shoes echoing sharply against the marble floor. Each step sounded certain. Final. Like a man who believed the story was over, and he had won. The doors closed behind him. Only then did my lawyer lean closer. "We could have negotiated," he whispered urgently. "You didn't have to give up everything." I looked down at my hands. Empty. "No," I said quietly. This was exactly how it needed to happen. He stared at me, confused, concerned, probably convinced he had just witnessed the quiet collapse of a woman who had lost too much. I stood, smoothed my coat, and thanked him for his time. Outside, the city greeted me with noise and movement. Cars rushing by, people talking into phones, life continuing with cruel indifference. The sky was a pale gray, heavy, but not yet broken. I stepped onto the courthouse steps and felt the cold air against my face. That's when the tears came. Not dramatic sobs. Not the kind that draw attention. Just silent tears that slid down my cheeks as I stared at the street. I wasn't crying because I had lost the penthouse, or the money, or the marriage. I was crying because he still didn't know. 10 years. 10 years of watching him underestimate me. 10 years of learning how he thought, how he planned, how he overlooked anything that didn't fit neatly into numbers and contracts. 10 years of preparing, without even realizing I was preparing. People say divorce is the end of a story. They're wrong. Sometimes, it's just the moment when the truth begins to surface. That night, I sat alone in the small apartment I had rented under my maiden name. No artwork on the walls. No expensive furniture. Just a mattress, a lamp, and a single suitcase. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from friends. Missed calls from family. Messages filled with pity, anger, disbelief. How could you let him do this to you? You deserve better. We always knew he was like this. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the suitcase and lifted out a small, unremarkable wooden box. No jewels, no gold, no obvious value. I placed it carefully on the table and sat across from it, staring. My father's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Never fight for what they expect you to fight for," he used to say. "That's how they distract you from what actually matters." The box clicked open. Inside were documents, not flashy, not impressive to anyone who didn't know how to read between the lines. Old contracts, legacy agreements, keys, literal and legal. Everything my husband thought was worthless. Everything he had taken without question. I closed the box slowly. Across the city, he was probably celebrating, pouring a drink in my penthouse, walking through rooms he thought he had conquered. He believed he had taken everything. He had no idea what he was really carrying. And that was the most dangerous part. The morning after the divorce felt unreal. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just empty. I woke up before the alarm, staring at the cracked white ceiling of my new apartment. The room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional sound of a neighbor's footsteps above me.
For a moment, I forgot.
Forgot the courthouse. Forgot the papers. Forgot that my life had been neatly dismantled and handed to someone else. Then reality settled in, slow and heavy. I was officially a woman who had lost everything. That's how everyone else saw it. I swung my legs off the mattress and stood there for a long time, barefoot on the cold floor, letting the feeling sink in. No heated marble tiles. No floor-to-ceiling windows. No city skyline greeting me like a trophy. Just a small room and the quiet truth. I made coffee in a chipped mug I had bought for $3. It tasted weak, almost bitter. I drank it anyway, standing by the window, watching people hurry to places that still belonged to them.
My phone buzzed again.
This time, it was my mother. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. Her voice broke through the line immediately. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I do." She sighed sharply. "You gave him everything. Everything. The house, the money, your father's things. Do you know how foolish that looks?" There it was. The word everyone was thinking. Foolish. "I didn't give him my father," I said softly. "That's not what I mean," she snapped. "You could have fought. Any woman would have fought." I pictured the courtroom again. The pen in my hand. His smile. "I fought in a different way," I said. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "By staying silent? By walking away with nothing?" "With what looks like nothing," I corrected. There was a pause on the line. Then, more gently, "Sweetheart, if you're in shock, just say so. We can help you." I thanked her and ended the call before she could say anything else. I knew how it looked. To the outside world, I was the woman who had folded too easily. The wife who let her husband walk away rich and untouched. The cautionary tale whispered at dinner tables. What they didn't see was how carefully I had chosen what not to fight for. 2 days later, I met my old friend Clara for lunch. She chose the restaurant, an expensive one I used to frequent when money felt permanent. I arrived early, dressed simply, and took a seat by the window. When Clara walked in, her eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Oh my God," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I can't believe this." I smiled faintly. "Neither can I." She sat down, gripping the menu without looking at it. "Tell me you're planning to appeal."
Or sue.
Or something. "No," I said. Her head snapped up. "No."
No.
She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He humiliated you. Took everything your father left you. Don't you feel angry?" I stirred my water slowly. "I feel observant." "That's not an emotion," she said. "It is when you've been ignored for years." She stared at me, searching my face. "You're scaring me a little." I almost smiled. I thought about all the arguments we'd had during the marriage. How every disagreement ended the same way, with him talking, convincing, overpowering. How he loved winning more than being right. I had learned something important during those years. He only noticed resistance. Silence made him careless. I didn't fight for the penthouse, I said finally, because I never wanted it. Clara blinked. You loved that place. No, I corrected gently. I loved the idea that it was mine. There's a difference. She shook her head. And the money? I didn't fight for that either. Then what would you fight for? She asked. I met her eyes. The things he never thought to protect. That afternoon, I walked through the city alone. Everywhere I went, memories followed me. Cafes we had visited. Streets where he used to hold my hand in public like a declaration of ownership. Stores where clerks still recognized me as his wife. At one boutique, the saleswoman hesitated when she saw me. Oh, she said awkwardly. I'm so sorry. I heard about everything. I nodded politely and walked out without buying anything. The rumors had spread faster than the truth ever could. By evening, I knew, without checking, that he was enjoying his victory. I could picture him clearly, sitting in the living room of the penthouse, drink in hand, feet propped up on the glass table he once said was too delicate. Walking through the rooms as if inspecting a conquered territory. Maybe he was already planning renovations. New furniture, new art, a new woman. The thought didn't hurt the way it should have. Instead, it clarified something. He believed ownership meant control. I knew better. That night, I opened the wooden box again. I spread the documents across the table carefully, aligning them like pieces of a puzzle. Each page told a story, not of wealth, but of structure, of leverage, of systems designed to reward patience. These were the things my father had taught me to value. Money makes noise, he used to say. Real power moves quietly. My husband had taken the loud things. I had kept the quiet ones. As I read through the papers, I realized something else. By taking everything so eagerly, he had made himself visible. Exposed. Predictable. People who believe they've already won stop looking over their shoulders. I smiled to myself, just slightly. The next day, a message came through on my phone. From him. Hope you're settling in. Let me know if you need anything. I stared at the screen for a long time. So generous. So confident. So completely unaware. I typed back only 2 words. I'm fine. That was the moment I understood the truth. He thought the story was about what he took. It wasn't. It was about what I let him take. And why? The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. No logo. No return address. Just my name written neatly across the front in black ink. For a moment, I didn't open it. I stood in my small kitchen, sunlight falling across the table, the envelope resting there like a quiet accusation. Something about it felt deliberate, unrushed, as if whoever had sent it knew I wouldn't ignore it. I slid my finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. We need to talk. Immediately. No signature, but I already knew who it was from. An hour later, I sat across from a man who hadn't changed in 20 years. Mr. Alden, my father's former legal partner, looked older now. His hair thinner, his posture less rigid, but his eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, watchful. A man who noticed what others missed. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, folding his hands together. I knew you wouldn't ask unless it mattered, I replied. A faint smile crossed his face. Your father used to say the same thing. Hearing my father mentioned still caught me off guard. Not painfully, just precisely. Like pressing a bruise you've learned to live with. Mr. Alden leaned back in his chair. Your ex-husband has been making inquiries. My expression didn't change. About what? About assets he doesn't understand, he said. And documents he signed without reading. There it was. The first crack. I waited. He came to our office yesterday, Mr. Alden continued. Confident. Charming. Certain he owned more than he did. And I asked. And he asked the wrong questions. I remembered the day my father had first explained the clause to me. I was 22, sitting in his study, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound books and the faint smell of tobacco and old paper. He had poured us both tea, though neither of us drank it. Marriage, he had said calmly, is not about love alone. It's about alignment. I frowned. That's not very romantic. He smiled. Romance is for stories. This is for survival. He slid a document across the desk toward me. It looked ordinary, boring even. Most people protect what they can see, he continued. Homes, accounts, jewelry. But real power lives in what they overlook. I didn't understand then. I did now. Mr. Alden opened his briefcase and placed a folder on the table between us. Do you remember this? He asked. I glanced down. The heading was familiar. A framework agreement. A legacy structure. Layers upon layers of legal language designed to discourage curiosity. Yes, I said quietly. I remember. Your husband didn't, he replied. He flipped the folder open, tapping a specific paragraph with his finger. The clause, he said. Buried deep. Referenced only once. Activated only under very specific conditions. I leaned forward, reading the words I already knew by heart. In the event of complete transfer of tangible marital assets, my lips pressed together. He assumed complete meant total ownership, Mr. Alden said. What it actually means is total responsibility. I looked up at him, including liabilities. Especially liabilities. The room felt suddenly warmer. He didn't just take the penthouse, Mr. Alden continued. He inherited every obligation tied to it. Debts. Deferred taxes. Maintenance agreements he never reviewed. And the heirlooms? I asked. Mr. Alden smiled slowly. Those were the key. My husband had always mocked those items. Old watches, antique ledgers, seemingly outdated certificates. Why do you even keep these, he used to ask. They're not worth anything. He was right by his definition of worth. What he never understood was that those objects weren't valuables. They were access. Each one corresponded to an entity, a trust, a holding structure that didn't appear on any balance sheet he'd bothered to review. And by insisting on taking everything, even the things he considered useless, he had unknowingly stepped into a position he wasn't qualified to manage. Or escape. He's trying to reverse the transfer, Mr. Alden said. Quietly. Can he? I asked. No, he replied simply. The clause is airtight. And time-locked. I exhaled slowly. Outside the window, the city moved as usual. People rushing. Lives intersecting. None of them aware that somewhere nearby, a man who thought he had won was beginning to realize the ground beneath him was shifting. What happens next? I asked. Mr. Alden studied me carefully. That depends on you. That night, I walked through the apartment again, barefoot, thinking. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was clarity. For years, I had lived inside a marriage where my value was measured by how little trouble I caused, where silence was mistaken for compliance, where my intelligence was underestimated because I didn't perform it loudly. The clause wasn't revenge. It was balance. A correction. My phone rang just after midnight. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Did you know? He demanded, skipping any greeting. Know what? I asked calmly. That clause, he snapped. That thing buried in the agreements. Did you know it was there? I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. I knew what my father put in place, I said. You knew what you signed. There was silence on the line. Then, quieter. You tricked me. No, I replied. You ignored me. The difference mattered. You need to fix this, he said. Immediately. I walked to the window, looking out at the lights scattered across the city, like constellations. There's nothing to fix, I said. You took everything, remember? You can't seriously expect me to carry all of this, he said, frustration bleeding through his control. You expected me to, I answered. Another pause. This one longer. He hung up without another word. I knew then that part 3 of the story, the part no one saw coming, had begun. The clause had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had revealed character. He had taken everything. Now he would learn what it meant to keep it. The first time he laughed at them, I should have known. We were still married then, newly settled into the penthouse, surrounded by glass walls and city lights. Everything in that apartment had been chosen to impress. Clean lines, sharp angles, nothing sentimental, except the box. He had opened it one evening while I was out, curiosity winning over indifference. When I came home, the contents were spread across the dining table like evidence in a case he had already dismissed. Old watches with worn leather straps, yellowed ledgers filled with handwriting no one bothered to read anymore, heavy keys that didn't fit any door in our home, certificates stamped with seals from institutions that sounded obsolete. "What is all this?" he asked, amusement dancing in his voice. "Museum leftovers?" "They were my father's," I said quietly. He shrugged. Then he had terrible taste in investments. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about him. He respected only what looked expensive. Now, months later, those same heirlooms sat in his penthouse. Not displayed, not appreciated, just shoved into drawers, closets, storage rooms. Taken,
Claimed.
and completely misunderstood. The first problem appeared as a letter from a private institution he'd never heard of. No threatening language, no legal drama, just a polite inquiry requesting verification of authority. He ignored it. Then came the second letter, and the third. Each one referenced a document number he didn't recognize, numbers tied to the very ledgers he'd dismissed as worthless. Annoyed, he finally opened one of the old books. He didn't understand it. The handwriting was elegant, but dense. The terminology, unfamiliar. The structure, unlike modern contracts. He skimmed, searching for numbers that mattered. They weren't there. What was there were names. Generations of them. Each tied together by obligations, not ownership. Meanwhile, I sat in my small apartment, rereading my father's notes. He had written in the margins, not explanations, but reminders. Power ages well. What lasts is what no one wants to steal. Never make the mistake of thinking the obvious prize is the real one. The heirlooms weren't sentimental keepsakes. They were proof of continuity. And continuity terrified people who lived only for the present. My phone rang late one afternoon. A number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carter?" a woman asked politely. "Yes." "This is Eleanor Finch from Northbridge Holdings. We've been trying to reach the current custodian." I smiled to myself. "You're speaking to the former one," I replied. There was a pause. "Ah," she said carefully. "Then you know why we're calling." "Yes," I said. "He doesn't." That evening, he stormed into the penthouse carrying one of the watches in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, tossing it onto the counter. "A watch," I replied evenly over the phone. "Don't be clever," he snapped. "Every time I try to do anything with these things, someone else shows up claiming authority." "They're not claiming," I said. "They're confirming." "Confirming what?" "That you don't have it." His jaw tightened. "They're in my possession." "That's not the same thing," I said softly. Silence. Then, bitterly, "You planned this." I leaned back in my chair. "No," I said. "You chose this." He had always believed possession was the final step. My father had taught me it was only the first and the weakest. The heirlooms worked like anchors. Each one tied him to a structure that required understanding, patience, and restraint. Qualities he had never valued. Every attempt to sell them triggered audits. Every attempt to leverage them required approvals he couldn't obtain. Every attempt to discard them raised questions he couldn't answer. They were useless to him, but irreplaceable to the systems they belonged to. He began to unravel. Subtly at first. Meetings postponed. Calls returned late. Assistants reassigned. Then more visibly. His voice sharper. His confidence brittle. His charm forced. People noticed. People always do. One night, he stood alone in the penthouse, staring at the city he once believed he owned. The heirloom sat in a box behind him, unchanged, unimpressed. For the first time, he wondered if taking everything had been a mistake. I thought back to another memory. My father, sitting across from me at the same wooden desk, sliding the box toward me. Why not sell them? I had asked then. Why keep things that don't grow in value? He had smiled patiently. Because they don't need to grow, he said. They hold.
What? I asked. People, he replied.
In place. That was the truth. The heirlooms weren't assets. They were anchors. And my husband had wrapped them around his own feet without ever looking down. The call came just after midnight. I can't get rid of them, he admitted, exhaustion bleeding through his anger. No matter what I do, they keep coming back to me. Of course they do, I said. They're yours. A bitter laugh escaped him. You always liked riddles. No, I corrected. I liked preparation. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't feel joy. I felt inevitability. This wasn't punishment. It was consequence. By taking the heirlooms, he had taken on a role he never asked for and never understood.
Custodian. Bearer.
Responsible party. And responsibility, unlike money, does not forgive ignorance. As dawn broke over the city, I knew something important had shifted. The story was no longer about what he had gained. It was about what he could never put down. The first sign was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the dangerous kind that settles in when people stop returning your calls. For years, my husband's phone had been an extension of his power. It buzzed constantly with messages from partners, investors, lawyers, and assistants. His calendar was always full, his presence always required. Now, the screen stayed dark longer than it should have. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. People were busy. Markets were unstable. Everyone needed time. That's what he told himself. But power doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes. The second sign came with a notification he couldn't ignore. Account temporarily restricted. He stared at the message, refreshing the app again and again, as if disbelief might reverse it. He called the bank immediately, voice-controlled but sharp. There were procedures, they explained. Reviews. Routine compliance checks. Nothing personal. Everything always sounded harmless, until it wasn't. Across the city, I sat at my kitchen table, reading quietly. I didn't need updates. The systems my father had designed moved without my involvement. That was the point. They didn't react to emotion or intent, only to structure. My husband had stepped into that structure blindly, and now it was tightening. The third sign came at a dinner party. He arrived late, wearing confidence like armor. He joked loudly, laughed harder than usual, told stories designed to remind everyone who he was. But people listened differently now. They smiled but didn't engage. They nodded but didn't commit. They excused themselves early. By the end of the night, he stood alone by the bar, drink untouched, watching conversations continue without him. Power is not about being heard. It's about being needed. I heard about it days later from a mutual acquaintance. He seemed off, she said carefully, distracted. I thanked her and changed the subject. I didn't need to defend him. The cracks spoke for themselves. He called me that night. I need to understand what's happening, he said, skipping pleasantries. You always do, I replied. This isn't normal, he insisted. Things don't just freeze. People don't just disappear. They do, I said, when conditions change. And what conditions are those? He snapped. I paused before answering. The ones you never bothered to read. Silence followed. He had always believed knowledge was something you outsourced. Lawyers for legality, advisors for strategy, assistants for details. What he never realized was that outsourcing understanding makes you dependent. And dependence is fragile. The heirlooms became liabilities faster than he expected. One ledger triggered an audit he couldn't delay. Another certificate required disclosures he couldn't provide. The watch, once mocked, became evidence of custodianship he couldn't escape. Each item alone was manageable. Together, they formed a net. His lawyers began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why did you accept full transfer? Did you review the legacy clauses? Who advised you on custodial responsibility? He had no good answers, because he hadn't asked the right questions when it mattered. One afternoon, he stood in the penthouse, surrounded by things that no longer felt like trophies. The city still glittered beyond the windows, but now it felt distant, unreachable. He noticed details he had ignored before. The hum of systems running constantly, the maintenance costs hidden in contracts, the weight of obligations he could neither sell nor surrender. Victory had weight, and it was crushing him. I thought back to the courtroom, the way he had smiled when I signed, the certainty in his posture. He had believed he was watching me lose. In reality, he had been watching himself inherit consequences. Another call came, this one shorter. "They're asking questions about the trusts," he said. "Which ones?" I asked. "All of them." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "That's what happens when you hold too much," I said. "Eventually, people want to know how." "You could stop this," he said quietly. I considered that. "No," I replied. "I couldn't. And even if I could, I wouldn't." "Why?" he demanded. "Because this isn't something I did," I said. "It's something you accepted." The final crack came with a letter he read 3 times before understanding it. Mandatory review pending. No accusations. No threats. Just inevitability. It meant scrutiny. It meant exposure. It meant time, something he had never learned to endure. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, flipping through documents he should have read years ago. The language was dense, the implications worse. For the first time, he realized that taking everything had removed his escape routes. He was holding too much to run. I slept soundly, not because I felt victorious, but because I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished justifying. Finished being underestimated. The cracks had formed. They would spread on their own. As dawn approached, he stood by the window again. The city hadn't changed. He had. And that was the most dangerous shift of all. The call came at exactly 12:07 a.m. Not earlier. Not later. Precise, just like him. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, back against the couch, a blanket wrapped loosely around my shoulders. The lights were off except for the small lamp in the corner. Outside, the city had settled into that strange half-sleep where even the noise feels distant. My phone vibrated once. Then again. His name lit up the screen. I didn't reach for it immediately. Some moments deserve to stretch. I let it ring until the vibration stopped. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time, I answered. "Hello," I said quietly. His breath hit the line before his voice did. "You knew this would happen," he said. It wasn't a question. I shifted slightly, listening to the faint echo on his end. The acoustics told me he was standing somewhere open, probably by the windows of the penthouse. He always went there when he felt cornered, as if height might restore control. "I knew you wouldn't read," I replied. "That's not fair," he snapped. "No one reads everything." "No," I said calmly. "Only people who think they're untouchable don't." There was a pause. Longer than before. Then his voice softened, not weaker, but altered. Less rehearsed. "They're asking for things I can't give," he said. "Explanations. Authority. Background." I closed my eyes. For years, I had waited to hear that tone from him. Not anger. Not arrogance. Uncertainty. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The question landed heavily between us. I thought carefully before answering. "Nothing," I said. "That's impossible," he replied. "You don't just let this happen." I smiled faintly in the dark. "That's where you're wrong," I said. "I let it happen years ago." The silence that followed was different. Not defensive. Not hostile. Curious. "Tell me," he said finally. "Why didn't you fight?" There it was. The question everyone had been asking. I shifted the phone to my other ear and stared at the ceiling. "Because fighting you was never the point," I said. "Understanding you was." "You make it sound like an experiment," he scoffed. "In a way," I said gently, "it was." I remembered the early days of our marriage. How he spoke about people not as individuals but as variables. Risks. Assets. Liabilities. How often he assumed silence meant agreement. "I watched how you win," I continued. "You overwhelm. You rush. You make people react. That's business," he said. "That's control. I corrected. And control only works when the other person moves. He said nothing. So I didn't move, I said. His voice dropped. Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? Yes, I said. And you don't care? I considered that. I care, I said honestly. Just not in the way you want. Another pause. This one felt heavier. They're reviewing everything, he said. My accounts, the structures, even things I've never touched. That's what happens when you take responsibility without understanding it, I replied. I didn't ask for this, he snapped. You insisted on it, I said. You said you wanted everything. I could almost hear him flinch at the word. Outside his window, the city lights blinked steadily, indifferent. Inside my apartment, the quiet felt deliberate. He exhaled sharply. You could explain it to them. You know how this works. Yes, I agreed. And he asked. And that wouldn't help you, I said. What do you mean? His frustration crept back in. It would delay things, I explained. But delay isn't relief. It's just fear stretched over time. You're enjoying this, he accused. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. No, I said. I'm done surviving it. For the first time since the call began, his voice cracked. Not dramatically, just enough to be real. I built everything, he said quietly. I didn't expect to lose control like this. I let the words hang. You didn't lose control, I said. You gave it away. To you? No, I replied. To your own assumptions. I remembered something my father once told me. When someone finally asks you for help, he said, pay attention to how they ask. It tells you whether they've changed or whether they're just afraid. I listened carefully now. What do you want me to do? He asked. The phrasing mattered. Not can you help me? Not I was wrong. Just what do you want me to do? I exhaled slowly. I want you to stop pretending this is happening to you, I said. It's happening because of you. That doesn't fix anything, he replied. No, I agreed. But it's where fixing starts. He laughed bitterly. You sound like my father. I smiled softly. That's not an insult, I said. The line went quiet again. I imagined him rubbing his temples, staring out at the skyline that once felt like proof of his invincibility. What if I can't carry this? He asked suddenly. The question surprised me. It wasn't strategic. It was human. Then you'll learn what it feels like to be overburdened, I said gently. Something you never noticed when I was. Another long silence. I didn't think you were capable of this, he said finally. That, I replied, was your greatest mistake. The call ended without goodbye. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just disconnected. I placed the phone beside me and sat there for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. That call wasn't about saving him. It was about him realizing that the woman he underestimated had never been absent, only quiet. And quiet, when combined with patience, is unstoppable. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the balance shifted. The midnight call had done what nothing else could. It had stripped him of the last illusion he had left, that I was powerless. Truth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments. A question here, a document there, a look that lasts half a second longer than it should. And by the time you realize it's surrounding you, it's already too late to escape. The first public sign appeared in the financial pages. Not a headline, just a paragraph. A short mention of a routine internal review involving several legacy custodial structures tied to high-value real estate holdings. No names, no accusations. But people like my husband didn't need names. They knew when the air shifted. He read the article 3 times, then a 4th. Then he searched for it on his phone, scrolling through comments that said nothing and implied everything. The article didn't attack him. That was worse. Silence creates space, and space invites speculation. That afternoon, he arrived late to a meeting he had once dominated. He noticed the way conversations stopped when he entered the room. Not dramatically, just politely. Seats were offered. Coffee was poured. But authority? That was missing. One of the junior partners, someone who used to nod eagerly at everything he said, cleared his throat. There's some concern, the man said carefully, about overlapping responsibilities. Concern from whom? My husband asked. The partner hesitated. From everyone, he finally admitted. Responsibility. That word followed him everywhere now. On emails, in calls, in quiet pauses between sentences. It was no longer about what he owned. It was about what he owed. That evening, he stood in the penthouse kitchen, staring at the box of heirlooms again. For the first time, he didn't see clutter. He saw evidence. Each item tied him to histories he had never bothered to learn. Each object whispered the same accusation. You didn't ask enough questions. Across town, I was invited to lunch. Not by friends. By professionals. A polite email. Neutral language. No assumptions. We'd appreciate your perspective. I smiled when I read it. Perspective was something I had plenty of. The lunch took place in a private dining room, quiet, discreet, intentionally unremarkable. 3 people sat across from me. No threats. No pressure. Just interest. We're trying to understand the original intent, one of them said, of the structures your father put in place. The intent was stability, I replied. And control, another asked. I shook my head. Continuity. They exchanged glances. Your ex-husband seems overwhelmed, the first said gently. I met his eyes. That's not my responsibility. He nodded slowly. That answer, he said, tells us more than you think. Truth, I learned that day, isn't about revealing secrets. It's about confirming patterns. My husband's pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The calls increased. Not angry ones. Careful ones. People wanted reassurance.
Clarity. Distance.
He began to realize that truth doesn't destroy you by accusation. It dismantles you by observation. No one accused him of wrongdoing. They simply stopped trusting him. He called me again 2 nights later. This time his voice was steady but tired. They know, he said. Know what? I asked. That I didn't understand what I took. I closed my eyes. That was always the risk, I said. They think I'm reckless, he continued. That I rushed into things I couldn't manage. I said nothing. They're not wrong, he admitted quietly. The words surprised both of us. I thought of all the times I had tried to explain something to him, only to be interrupted, dismissed, corrected. Now, finally, he was listening. Too late. The truth is out, he said, and it's costing me. Yes, I agreed. It always does. What did it cost you? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I thought carefully before answering. It cost me comfort, I said. Certainty. Being believed. And was it worth it? I didn't answer immediately. Yes, I said finally, because I got something better. What? He asked. Myself, I replied. He exhaled slowly. I don't think I can recover from this, he said. Recovery isn't always about returning to what you were, I said. Sometimes it's about becoming something else. I don't know how, he admitted. That, I said gently, is the price. The next morning, the review became official. Still no accusations. Still no charges. Just oversight. And oversight, when you've built your identity on unchecked authority, feels like suffocation. He stopped hosting. Stopped boasting. Stopped pretending. The penthouse no longer felt like a throne. It felt like a spotlight. Every wall reflected responsibility. Every object carried weight. One evening, he opened a drawer and found a note he didn't remember reading before, written in my father's handwriting. Truth doesn't punish. It corrects. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down, slowly, heavily, as if his body had finally accepted what his mind had been resisting. Meanwhile, I walked freely. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just unburdened. I hadn't won. I had released myself from something that had been shrinking me for years. The truth had come out, and its price was no longer mine to pay. Powerlessness is a story people tell about you when they don't understand your silence. For years, that story followed me. In boardrooms where my husband spoke, and I listened. At dinner parties where my opinions were redirected. In rooms where my quiet was mistaken for consent. People assumed I had no power because I didn't display it the way they expected. They were wrong. I remember the first time I realized silence could be a weapon. It was early in our marriage, during an argument that wasn't really about anything important. He wanted something done his way. I disagreed.
Gently.
He interrupted me. Then he talked. He talked until my point dissolved under the weight of his confidence. When he finished, he smiled, as if he had explained something to a child. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was learning. I learned how he thought power worked. Loud meant strong. Speed meant intelligence. Winning meant being right. I also learned what he never saw. That patience outlasts force. That listening gathers information. That stillness unsettles people who rely on momentum. During our marriage, I watched. I watched how he chose allies, not by loyalty, but by usefulness. I watched how he dismissed details he couldn't immediately monetize. I watched how he assumed protection existed simply because he'd never needed it before. He believed systems served people like him. My father had taught me the opposite. My father's lessons were never dramatic. No lectures. No warnings. Just quiet moments. Sitting beside him while he reviewed documents, he'd say things like, "Who benefits if this fails?"
Or,
"Who pays attention when nothing happens?" At the time, I thought he was talking about business.
he was talking about life.
There were moments I almost spoke up. Moments when staying quiet hurt. When he spoke over me in public and someone laughed. When he dismissed something I'd carefully considered. When my name disappeared from conversations I had helped shape. Each time, I swallowed the urge to correct him. Not out of fear, out of calculation. People confuse endurance with weakness. They think if you can bear something, it must not hurt. They never ask why you're bearing it. I bore it because I was preparing myself. Not for revenge. For independence. I learned how the structures worked. I memorized clauses. I noticed patterns. I didn't confront him because confrontation made him alert. And alert people cover their tracks. The day my father died, everything changed. Not in obvious ways, but internally. I realized then that my safety had never come from my husband. It had come from knowledge, from foresight, from systems designed by someone who understood that power is inherited, not seized. When my husband proposed the divorce terms, he expected resistance, negotiation, emotion. What he didn't expect was agreement. He didn't understand that by insisting on taking everything, he was revealing exactly how he valued things. He took what shined. I kept what endured. In the weeks following the divorce, people treated me like someone who had survived a loss. They spoke softly. They offered help. They assumed I was broken. I let them. Sometimes, letting people underestimate you is the greatest freedom. One afternoon, I stood in a bookstore, flipping through a volume my father once owned. Inside the cover, he had written, "Power that needs to be announced is already unstable." I smiled. I had lived that truth without realizing it. When the fallout began, people asked how I stayed calm. "How aren't you angry? How are you okay with this?" They thought calmness meant detachment. It didn't. It meant completion. I wasn't powerless during my marriage. I was observant. I wasn't silent during the divorce. I was precise. I wasn't absent during his collapse. I was finished. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in the way my shoulders relaxed, in the way I slept without waking in the night, in the way decisions felt lighter without needing approval. I had never lost myself. I had simply stopped shrinking. The world often celebrates visible strength, but visible strength attracts resistance. Quiet strength? That changes outcomes before anyone notices. As my husband struggled under the weight of what he'd taken, I felt no urge to intervene. Not because I lacked compassion, but because compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. I had already paid enough. That night, I stood at my window again. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, because I had. The lights no longer felt like something I needed to reach. They felt like background. Power, I realized, was never something I needed to claim. It had always been something I understood. And understanding is permanent. I wasn't rebuilding. I wasn't recovering. I was arriving at the version of myself that had been waiting patiently all along. People don't come back when they miss you. They come back when they miss what you gave them. I understood that long before he knocked on my door. It was raining that evening, steady, quiet rain that turned the city into a blur of reflections. I had just returned from work, my coat damp, my hair pulled loose from a long day that felt strangely peaceful. The knock was soft, not hesitant, careful. I paused with my hand on the light switch, already knowing who it was. Some instincts never leave you. I opened the door. He stood there, rain clinging to his coat, hair slightly undone, eyes darker than I remembered. Not defeated, but no longer armored. "Can we talk?" he asked. The question surprised me. Not because he asked, because he asked instead of demanding. I stepped aside. He looked around the apartment slowly. Not critically, not dismissively, curiously. "This is simple," he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded, as if that answered more than the room ever could. We sat across from each other at the small table. The same table where I once spread documents. The same table where I had learned to breathe again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't come to fight," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "I came because I don't recognize my life anymore." I waited. "I thought if I had everything, I'd be safe," he continued. I was wrong. I folded my hands gently in my lap. He leaned forward slightly. "I don't want to go back to how things were. I just want to understand where I lost you." There it was. The question he should have asked years ago. I thought carefully before answering. "You didn't lose me all at once," I said. "You lost me every time you spoke over me. Every time you assumed my silence was agreement. Every time you treated partnership like ownership." His jaw tightened. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said. "You just never noticed when you did." He exhaled sharply. "I can fix things." I looked at him. "You don't want to fix us," I said gently. "You want relief." "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm different now." I nodded. "You're humble. That's growth." "No," I said softly. "That's consequence." The words settled between us like dust. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. "I didn't see you," he said quietly. "Not really." I believed him. That didn't change anything. "Seeing me now doesn't rewrite the past," I said. He turned to face me. "I don't want to rewrite it. I just want a chance." I shook my head. "A chance requires trust," I said. "And trust requires safety." "I can be safe." "For you," I replied. "Not for me." The silence grew heavy. He looked around again at the bare walls, the single lamp, the absence of excess. "You seem calm," he said. "I am." "How?" he asked. "After everything." "Because I stopped hoping you'd change," I said, "and started changing myself." He sat back down slowly. "I miss you," he said. I met his eyes. "I miss who I was before I made myself small," I replied. He flinched. "I never asked you to be small." "No," I agreed. "You just made it the cost of staying." The rain intensified outside, drumming softly against the windows. "I'm not asking you to save me," he said finally. "I'm asking you to stand with me." I stood, and that was my answer. "I won't stand where I once disappeared," I said, "and I won't return to a place I had to leave to survive." He looked up at me, eyes searching. "So this is it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. That was new. He stood, hesitated, then nodded once. "I hope you're happy," he said quietly. "I am," I replied, "because I chose myself." At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never realized how strong you were." I smiled, faintly. "That's because I never needed you to," I said. He left without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Not in relief, in release. Some endings don't need closure. They are closure. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no regrets, just stillness. He had tried to come back, and I had stayed. People kept asking me the same question long after everything ended. What did he take from you? They asked it gently,
Carefully.
as if the answer might still hurt. At first, I listed the obvious things. The penthouse, the money, the years. But those answers never felt complete, because the truth was far more uncomfortable and far more freeing. He didn't take my wealth. He took my illusion. The illusion that security comes from proximity to power. The illusion that comfort equals safety. The illusion that love, when paired with control, is still love. Those illusions had been heavy. Letting them go felt like breathing after years underwater. In the months that followed, my life didn't become extraordinary. It became honest. I woke up without anxiety. I made decisions without rehearsing